Secret meetings, a love story no one was supposed to know. The night was dark, as if the universe itself was conspiring to keep their secret hidden. A soft breeze whispered through the trees as Emily stood by the edge of the park, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around nervously, making sure no one was watching her. The world seemed empty, save for the flicker of distant streetlights and the sound of her breath. She waited, shivering, not from the cold, but from anticipation. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, but finally, she saw him. Daniel emerged from the shadows, his dark hair tousled, his expression soft yet urgent. The moment their eyes met, everything else disappeared. The weight of the world, the chains of their separate lives, the lies they had told to keep this secret, all of it vanished when they were together. "Emily," he whispered, his voice full of longing as he stepped closer. "Daniel," she breathed, her heart skipping a beat as he gently cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. They had met under impossible circumstances. Emily was married, locked in a loveless relationship that had long since withered away. Her husband, Richard, was a businessman who cared more for his deals than for his wife. The mansion they shared was cold, a silent tomb filled with expensive furniture and hollow promises. Daniel was different. He was a quiet, thoughtful man, a literature professor who lived a simple life, but who understood Emily in ways her husband never could. They had met by chance one afternoon at a cafe. Emily had been sitting alone, sipping coffee and lost in a novel, when Daniel approached, commenting on the book she was reading. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of it, Emily felt as though she had known him forever. They met again the following week, then again the week after that. What started as innocent conversations soon blossomed into something far more dangerous. Their first kiss had been electric, a moment neither of them had anticipated but both had longed for. From that moment, they were caught in a whirlwind of passion, sneaking away whenever they could. Every stolen glance, every whispered word, every hurried embrace felt like fire under their skin, pulling them closer together and further from the lives they were supposed to lead. But the danger of discovery was always there, hanging over them like a sword waiting to fall. They had to be careful. No one could know, not Richard, not Daniel's colleagues, not anyone. If their secret were exposed, it would ruin them both. "I hate that we have to keep doing this," Emily said softly, her fingers curling around Daniel's hand, sneaking around, hiding in the shadows. "It's like we're thieves in the night." "I know," Daniel replied, his eyes filled with pain. "But what choice do we have? If they find out—" "I don't care anymore," Emily interrupted, her voice trembling. "I don't care if the world burns. I can't keep living like this. I need you." Her words hung in the air, raw and desperate. She had tried to suppress her feelings, tried to tell herself that what they had was temporary, that it could never last. But the more time she spent with Daniel, the more she realized she couldn't live without him. "I need you too," Daniel said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "more than I've ever needed anything." For a moment they stood in silence, the enormity of their situation pressing down on them. Emily had always been the good wife, the one who followed the rules, the one who kept up appearances. But with Daniel, she felt alive in a way she never had before. She was no longer the woman who dutifully smiled and played her part. With Daniel, she was free. But freedom came with a price. One evening, as they lay tangled together in Daniel's small apartment, the walls of the world outside seemed to close in on them. Emily's phone buzzed incessantly on the bedside table. Richard. He was calling, and she knew he would start asking questions if she didn't answer. "I should go," she whispered, though every part of her wanted to stay. Daniel tightened his grip on her, his brow furrowing in frustration. "I hate that you have to leave. I hate that we only get these fragments of time." "I hate it too," she confessed, her heart aching. She kissed him deeply as if trying to pour all her love and regret into that one moment. But I'll come back. I always come back. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of their secret grew heavier. The thrill of their stolen moments was tainted by the fear that they were living on borrowed time. Every time Emily returned home, she felt like an intruder in her own life. Richard barely noticed her anymore, absorbed in his work and his own affairs, but she knew that if he ever discovered her betrayal, it would destroy him, and, by extension, her. One day, Emily arrived at the park for their usual rendezvous, but Daniel wasn't there. She waited for what felt like hours, pacing under the cover of trees, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. Finally, just as she was about to leave, she saw him. But something was different. He looked pale, shaken, like a man who had seen something terrible. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, rushing to his side. Daniel hesitated, his jaw clenched. "Richard knows." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat as panic surged through her. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He found out," Daniel said, his voice thick with sorrow. "I don't know how, but he knows about us. He confronted me yesterday." Emily's heart raced. This was it. Their world was about to collapse. "What did he say?" she asked, fear gripping her. He said he wouldn't destroy us publicly, but he made it clear that I needed to stay away from you, or else." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as the reality of their situation came crashing down. They had always known this day would come, but now that it was here, it felt like the end of everything. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with both love and despair. "I don't know, Emily, but I can't lose you. I don't care what Richard says. I don't care what the world thinks. I love you. I love you too," she sobbed, her tears spilling onto his hands. "But we can't keep living like this. I can't keep lying to everyone." "Then leave him," Daniel said, his voice full of urgency. "Come with me. We can go somewhere far away where no one knows us. We can start over." The thought was tempting, to leave behind the life that had suffocated her, to be with the man she truly loved, to live without fear or guilt. It was everything she had ever wanted. But deep down, Emily knew it wasn't that simple. She had ties to her old life, responsibilities she couldn't just walk away from. And Richard, despite everything, wasn't the kind of man to let her go without a fight. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Daniel insisted, his eyes burning with conviction. "You are the strongest person I know. We can do this together. Please, Emily, choose me." Emily looked into his eyes, the man who had stolen her heart, the man she had risked everything for. She wanted to say yes, wanted to run away with him and leave behind the wreckage of her old life. But the weight of the decision was too much. "I need time," she said, her voice cracking. "Just a little more time." Daniel's face fell, but he nodded. "I'll wait for you. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait." They parted that night with heavy hearts, knowing that their secret love had been exposed, and the consequences were yet to come. And then, one evening, everything came crashing down. Richard walked into the room, his face twisted with anger. "I know everything, Emily," he spat, throwing a stack of papers onto the table. "I know about you and that man." Emily's heart stopped as she looked down at the papers, photographs of her and Daniel, together, kissing, embracing. Her worst fear had come true. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's eyes burned with fury. "You're going to end it, now, or I'll ruin him. I'll ruin both of you." Emily felt her world shatter. She had thought she could escape, thought she could have a life with Daniel. But now, the reality of what she had done was staring her in the face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. But in her heart she knew that no amount of apologies could fix what had been broken. Emily stood frozen, the photographs of her and Daniel scattered across the table like shards of a broken mirror. Each image felt like a stab to her chest, reminders of the moments when she thought she had finally found happiness. But now, those moments were tainted, twisted into weapons to be used against her. "I loved you, Emily." Richard's voice was a low growl, filled with the kind of pain that comes from betrayal. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. His cold fury was enough to send a chill down her spine. "For years I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Tears blurred her vision, but Emily didn't flinch under his gaze. She had expected this moment ever since Daniel told her Richard knew. But expecting it hadn't made it any easier. "It wasn't about you, Richard," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "It was about me. I was drowning and you didn't see it." His eyes darkened, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something vulnerable behind his anger, something raw and hurt. "I gave you the world, Emily. I built a life for us, and you turned your back on it." Emily shook her head, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "You built a life for yourself. You never once asked if it was the life I wanted." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Emily's heart ached for all the years she had spent pretending, playing the role of the perfect wife in a marriage that had died long before Daniel had entered her life. She had convinced herself for so long that this was what love was supposed to feel like: duty, obligation, and a hollow kind of companionship. But now she knew better. With Daniel she had felt alive, had rediscovered parts of herself that she thought were lost forever. But at what cost? Richard took a step toward her, his expression hardening again. "You're going to end it," he repeated, his voice flat. "You're going to end whatever you have with him, or I swear I'll destroy him. I'll make sure he never works again. He'll regret ever laying eyes on you." Emily's heart clenched at the threat. Richard wasn't bluffing. He had the power to ruin Daniel's career, his entire life, and it was all her fault. "Please, don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking. "He doesn't deserve to be punished. If you want to blame someone, blame me." "Oh, I do blame you," Richard snapped, his eyes narrowing. "But I'm not letting him get away with this either. He took what was mine." "I'm not a possession," Emily said softly, but the words felt hollow, even to her. For so long, that was exactly what she had been, a prized possession in Richard's life, someone to be displayed but never truly seen. And now she was paying the price for stepping outside that role. Richard's phone buzzed on the table, drawing his attention. He glanced at the screen before turning back to her. "I have a meeting. When I get back, you'll have made your decision." Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Emily standing alone in the dimly lit room, her mind racing. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling as she picked up one of the photographs. It was of her and Daniel sitting by the river, their hands entwined, their faces glowing with happiness. How had everything gone so wrong? She knew what Richard was capable of. If she didn't end things with Daniel, he would make good on his threats. He would destroy Daniel's career, his reputation, everything. But how could she walk away from the one person who had made her feel truly alive? The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a crushing force. She had to protect Daniel no matter what it cost her. But the thought of never seeing him again, of never feeling his arms around her, was unbearable. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down, seeing Daniel's name on the screen. Her heart ached as she answered the call. "Emily?" His voice was soft, filled with concern. "Are you okay?" She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "Richard knows. He has pictures. He's threatening to destroy you if we don't end this." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Emily could hear the tension in Daniel's breathing. "We'll figure this out," he said finally. "We can't let him control us like this." "I can't let him ruin your life, Daniel," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I can't let you lose everything because of me. I don't care about my career, Emily. I care about you." His words broke something inside her, and she sobbed quietly, covering her mouth with her hand to muffle the sound. How had she ended up here, torn between the love of her life and the life she had promised to leave behind? "I can't lose you," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "Please don't let him take you away from me." Emily wiped her tears, her heart shattering with every word. She wanted nothing more than to run to him, to tell him that they would figure it out together. But deep down, she knew that staying with Daniel would only bring him pain. Richard wouldn't stop until he had destroyed everything they had built. "I have to protect you," she said finally, her voice hollow. "I can't let him hurt you." "Emily, don't do this," Daniel pleaded. "Don't let him win." But she had already made up her mind. She couldn't be the reason Daniel's life was torn apart. She loved him too much to let that happen. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you, but I have to let you go." Daniel was silent on the other end of the line, and Emily's heart broke all over again as she waited for him to speak. "I love you too," he said finally, his voice filled with pain. "But this isn't over. It can't be over." She hung up the phone, her hands shaking, her chest aching with the weight of her decision. She knew she had made the right choice, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. The days that followed were a blur. Emily avoided Richard as much as possible, retreating into herself as she tried to process the emptiness that now filled her life. She went through the motions, pretending that everything was fine, but inside, she was falling apart. One evening, as she sat in the garden, staring at the flowers that had once brought her joy, Richard approached her. He stood there for a moment, watching her, before finally speaking. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice cold. "But don't think for a second that I've forgiven you." Emily didn't respond. She didn't have the energy to fight anymore. She had lost the one person who had made her feel alive, and now she was left with nothing but the shell of a life she no longer wanted. As Richard walked away, Emily closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. She had made the sacrifice to protect Daniel, but in doing so, she had lost everything that mattered. And in the quiet of the evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she realized that love, true, soul-deep love, wasn't something that could be hidden away or destroyed. It would always live in her heart, a flame that no amount of fear or regret could ever extinguish. Even if she had to live the rest of her life without him, she would carry Daniel with her. And that, perhaps, was the only solace she had left. Emily stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the photographs Richard had thrown across the table. The evidence of her affair with Daniel lay scattered before her like shards of glass, each picture reflecting the painful truth she could no longer avoid. Richard's fury was palpable, his face contorted with rage, but behind his anger Emily could sense something else: betrayal, hurt, and most terrifyingly, a cold resolve. "You thought you could fool me?" Richard spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't know about your little rendezvous with that man?" Emily's heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled as she struggled to find the right words. "Richard, You don't get to explain," he roared, slamming his fist on the table, making her jump. "You've humiliated me, Emily. You've thrown away everything we built for what? For some fleeting romance with a nobody?" Emily bit her lip, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. The weight of her choices, of the lies and the secrecy, crushed her. She had never wanted this to happen, never wanted to hurt anyone. But now, the consequences of her actions were unraveling before her, and the reality of losing everything she had known for the love she had found was terrifying. "Please," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't do anything to him. I'll end it. You'll end it," Richard interrupted, his tone dripping with mockery. "You'll end it now, after you've had your fun, after you've ruined our marriage. No, Emily, this isn't something you get to walk away from. You don't get to choose anymore." Emily felt the walls closing in on her, her entire world collapsing under the weight of her guilt and Richard's rage. She had never seen him like this, so cold, so calculating, and she knew that whatever came next would be nothing short of devastating. "You'll end it tonight," Richard continued, his voice low and menacing. "But that's not enough. You're going to tell him it's over and then you'll stay. You'll stay in this house and you'll act like the perfect wife. Because if you don't, if you even think about running back to him, I'll destroy him. I'll ruin him, Emily, and I'll make sure he never recovers." Emily's heart shattered as she listened to Richard's threat. He wasn't bluffing. He had the power, the connections, and the resources to make good on his promise. Daniel's life would be over if she didn't comply. And the thought of Daniel suffering because of her, it was too much to bear. Her mind raced. She had to protect Daniel no matter the cost. But how? How could she walk away from the man she loved, knowing that it would break both their hearts? How could she return to a life of coldness and emptiness, living in a gilded cage with a man who no longer saw her as a partner, but as property? "I'll do it," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "I'll end it with him. But please, Richard, don't hurt him." Richard studied her for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and satisfaction. "You will end it," he repeated, his tone harsh, "and you will stay. But don't think for a second that I'm forgiving you. This marriage is over, Emily. You may stay here, but you'll be nothing to me. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, the tears finally spilling over as she realized the full extent of what she had lost. She had chosen love, but now it seemed that love had come at the highest price. Later that evening, Emily found herself walking to the park where she and Daniel had often met. The familiar trees and benches, once symbols of their secret joy, now felt like witnesses to her impending heartbreak. Her steps felt heavy, each one dragging her closer to the inevitable conversation that would shatter them both. When she saw Daniel waiting for her, his face lighting up at the sight of her, her heart ached with an intensity she had never known. He didn't know. He didn't know that this would be the last time they would see each other, the last time they would share a moment of happiness. "Emily," Daniel smiled, reaching out to pull her into his arms, but she stepped back, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Daniel, I can't do this anymore," she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. His smile faltered, confusion washing over his face. "What? What are you talking about?" Emily's hands shook as she tried to explain. "Richard knows. He found out about us. He threatened you, Daniel. He said if I don't end things with you, he'll destroy you." Daniel's face paled, but his expression was resolute. "Let him try," he said, stepping forward, determination in his eyes. "I don't care what he does to me, Emily. I love you. We'll figure this out together." But Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, you don't understand. He'll ruin you, Daniel. He has the power to do it, and I can't let that happen. I can't let you lose everything because of me. Emily, I have to end this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have to walk away. It's the only way to protect you." Daniel's eyes filled with pain as he reached for her hands, holding them tightly. "You don't have to do this. We can find a way. We can leave. We can—" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm despite the tears. "You deserve better, Daniel. You deserve a life without all of this, without the lies and the secrecy. I can't keep hurting you like this." Daniel shook his head, his grip tightening on her hands. "But you're not hurting me. Losing you, that would be the only thing that could hurt me." Emily's heart broke at his words, but she knew what she had to do. With a sob, she pulled her hands from his and stepped back, putting distance between them. "I love you, Daniel, but I can't be with you. Not like this. I'm so sorry." Daniel stared at her, his eyes filled with anguish, and for a moment neither of them moved. The silence between them was suffocating, filled with all the things they could never say, all the dreams that would never come true. And then, with one last look at the man she loved, Emily turned and walked away, her heart shattering with every step she took. Days turned into weeks, and the void in Emily's life grew deeper with each passing day. She lived in a house that no longer felt like home, with a man who no longer looked at her with anything but cold disdain. Richard had gotten what he wanted. He had broken her, and in doing so, had broken the love she had fought so hard to hold on to. But even in her grief, Emily held on to the memories of her time with Daniel, the way he had made her feel alive, the way he had seen her for who she truly was. And though they were no longer together, she knew that a part of her heart would always belong to him. But she had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Months later, Emily found herself standing by the park once again, lost in thought. She had tried to move on, tried to bury the love she had for Daniel, but no matter how hard she tried, he was always there, a constant presence in her heart. As she turned to leave, she saw a figure in the distance, tall, familiar, unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat as Daniel walked toward her, his eyes locking onto hers. "Emily," he said softly, his voice full of the love and pain they had shared. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their past hanging between them. And then, without a word, Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. And for the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other.